Thank you very much. I have to say I'm really glad that I'm in Budapest. Whenever I cross the bridge over the river, then I know that I'm in the right place when I see this magnificent, wonderful view. So thank you, and I'm saying this to the organizers for the invitation. It's an honor, but also an obligation. I do hope that I will face this challenge. Right, I'm going to talk about the Polish perspective regarding the topic of our panel. First let me say a few introductory remarks. Constitutional systems change very often in an evolutionary way. Sometimes they change without visible change. And we have a variety of examples in the history. Like, for example, in ancient Rome, in the period of the Republic, power was being slowly transferred from the Senate to following emperors. In Great Britain, of 18th and 19th century, the power was being slowly transferred from the crown to the government. And this is exactly the case of the European Union, of the constitutional system. I always hesitate before using these words, but let's assume that this is the constitutional system of the European Union. Well, as we know, the European Union, contrary to other international organizations, has managed to develop its own political and constitutional structures, its own political and constitutional system, as a matter of fact. The system, which is based on two foundations. The first one, intergovernmental cooperation, and a second one, activity of central bureaucracy. And the system has been changing step by step, gradually, in a long process. And the big and important element of this process was, I would say, apart from creating autonomous institutions, it was transferring power from member states to Brussels, which actually took place in two stages. At least I divided in two stages. At the first stage, all these actions were taken for, I'd say, practical reasons, for practical needs. But at the second stage, the actions were taken, or the actions aimed at least from the perspective of some political circuses, at building a European state, a kind of federation. And the Maastricht Treaty was a turning point in this regard. There are plenty of descriptions of this process. Let me not to focus on this issue, because my speech is about the Polish perception and how Poles perceive this issue. Well, in Poland, until very recently, we have not perceived the European Union in this way. I mean, in the dimension of constitutional system, as a gradually forming state. Both in the pre-accession and post-accession periods, the public opinion and public elites believed or looked at the European Union as an organization providing prosperity and promoting important values which made Europe successful after the Second World War, the values like democracy, like rule of law, like solidarity, like free market economy, etc. So everything which was matched with so-called good life. So the assessment of the European Union in my country on the Vistula River, I can imagine also in other Eastern European countries who have managed to release themselves from the Soviet occupation. The assessment was strongly determined by the fascination of the West, by conviction that the West is the promised land, and it is just worth taking patterns from Western countries. And all this lacked any reflection on the activities aimed at building European state, aimed at creating federation, which were visible at that time. A reflection that the agenda of Brussels and of some European capitals is full of pro-federalist demands, which proves a clear proof, which delivers a clear proof that the debate on the European Union in Poland was clearly one-sided, that there was too much optimism about the European Union, that we did not understand everything what was going on at that time. Well, honestly, this is my own experience. We didn't even have books, at least, the books in Polish language. I remember my book, the book that I prepared myself for the exam for the European law, written, by the way, by the current Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, who was co-author of this book. And there was no notion, there was no remark regarding the federation. Well, there were also other sources which I used and made myself aware that tendencies like this existed. But for the majority, for the vast majority of Poles, as I can imagine, this word, federation, federalization, did not exist. And that was exactly the atmosphere in which Poland in early and late 90s was preparing for the accession. After liberating from the Soviet camp as a freshly, newly baked democracy, at that time, the emphasis was mainly put on creating modernized, a new constitutional identity, which was finally established, as you maybe know, in 1997. All energy was invested in creating new solutions. These were different solutions, but mostly based on Western values and institutions, but partly also institutions and values arising from our tradition. And there was a big desire to meet democratic requirements, to meet democratic standards. The standards which were also involved in the Maastricht Treaty and all other later European treaties. A similar atmosphere prevailed in the post-accession period. Well, that atmosphere gave rise to enthusiasm of the public opinion and politicians. Just a few opposition parties were telling stories about the threats from the West, about the pro-federalistic agenda. But Poles didn't listen to them. And it also gave rise, the atmosphere also gave rise to the first judgments of the Polish Constitutional Court. It is true that these judgments were very, very restrained as for the idea of the integration. I mean, they were intended to protect national constitution by saying that there is a limitation of transfer of powers from Poland to the center, to Brussels. However, it's hard to say, it's hard to believe that this strong position of the tribunal was a result of a deep reflection, if I may put it in this way, that someone put his, this is an Indian principle, that someone put his, the judges put their ear to the ground and tried to listen to the beat of the horses from the distance. In other words, that they truly noticed that there is that the idea of integration, as a matter of fact, at least for some mainstream politicians, means something more than strengthening tides, strengthening bonds between national states. And, well, the reason why the tribunal acted like that was that he made use, as may be assumed instinctively, the German patterns, the patterns which were produced by the German court. Well, we have a variety of examples in the past when our tribunal referred to the judgments of the German court. Well, the German court is known, is famous for its reservation about the idea of federation, as Professor Grasser mentioned. So I believe that our tribunal went exactly the same direction, took the same road in this area. And this is how two famous judgments were produced, were issued. The judgment of May 2005 and judgment of November 2010. Judgments creating the Polish formula of constitutional identity and some theses including in them. Let me not to develop this issue as we have time limitations, but these were the first judgments indicating where's the boundary, where's the limitation of transferring of power from Warsaw to Brussels. The awareness of the society, but also of at least some political circuses, the awareness regarding the federalistic agenda of the European establishment began to appear in 2015, maybe a little bit earlier, but that was an important time. And this was influenced mostly by statements of the prominent politicians, Western politicians, who started to say openly that we need a federation, that the idea of federation is something worth realizing. But another factor here was the big dispute that you all know between the Republic of Poland and Brussels, the European Union, especially European institutions like European Commission and the Court of Justice of the European Union. The dispute over the rule of law principle, because actually this dispute revealed that officials or politicians in Brussels and judges in Luxembourg, they are eager to question the right of Polish authorities to establish the inside legislation in a free way. What is more, the dispute revealed, these guys will to demonstrate conviction about the supremacy of EU law over the Polish law. Well, in the atmosphere of strong tensions, far-going instruments were used. I mean, the instruments which were going to enforce obedience of Polish authority. And these were different tools, like, for example, the regulation of conditionality, like the European debt. They both bring such an effort that the officials in Brussels try to make Poland obedient in the areas that they want our country to be obedient. And this is a time when two important judgments came. The first judgment, given on 14 July 2025, referring to the issue of so-called interim measures, the tribunal said that interim measures, like suspending the discipline chamber, the chamber of the Supreme Court of the Republic of Poland, cannot interfere with the sphere of Polish constitutional system. That, in other words, there are limitations concerning these measures. And the second judgment, the judgment on November 2021, in which the Constitutional Tribunal said that the Treaty of Lisbon cannot be interpreted in a way which is not inconsistent with the Polish constitution. That, like in the later case, there is limitation in this regard. Thank you very much for your attention.